Michigan just won a national championship on the strength of its defense, and in particular, their defensive line. But will Notre Dame's defensive line unit be able to achieve similar success in 2024 with so many key guys returning and a key addition in the transfer portal? We cover all that and more on today's edition of Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up? Welcome into Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. Today is Wednesday, January 10th, and thank you for getting your day started right here by making this your first listen of the day. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I graduated from Notre Dame in 2018, and now I'm a producer covering college football for Fox Sports. And today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire could feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. If this is your first time tuning into the show, or if you're an everyday listener, I greatly appreciate you being here with me today, and I'd love it if you like the video below and subscribe to the channel if you're watching on YouTube, or you can rate the show 5 stars and subscribe to the podcast, or you can do all the above. I certainly would not be opposed to that either. And if you missed yesterday's episode, I recorded it just a few hours after the national championship game wrapped up. I gave my initial reaction to the game and what lessons Notre Dame can take away from the way that Michigan won the title. As for today, we got Mike Renner back on the show. Mike's been on with me before, and he's great. He's a fellow Notre Dame alum and diehard fan. Plus, he's worked as an NFL analyst for several years now. He's worked for Pro Football Focus. Now he's a draft analyst for The Messenger, and he hosts an NFL podcast for us here at the Locked On Podcast Network called Renner Ranks. We covered a ton in this conversation, from the gap between Notre Dame and Michigan in terms of NFL talent, the ceiling for Notre Dame's defensive line unit next year, as well as Rylie Leonard's upside, plus some draft stuff at the end. So we covered a lot. Let's get right into it. All right, I'm joined now by NFL draft analyst Mike Renner. And Mike, I want to start with what we all watched on Monday night. Michigan won the national championship. God, that's not even fun to say at all. But they did it by controlling the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball against Washington. It's really been their calling card for the past 3 seasons. And their brand of football is basically the model for what Marcus Freeman is trying to build at Notre Dame. So with that in mind, how many future NFL guys does Michigan have on their fronts? So that way we can get a better understanding of the type of talent you need in order to compete at that level.
They're all future NFL guys is the thing. And I think that's the secret sauce of the Michigan defense this year, was that I think every starter that was out there will be drafted. Now, they may not have blue chip talent. Like, you go and look at their, outside of, Will Johnson, the sophomore cornerback, outside of Mason Graham, the sophomore defensive tackle, there might not be another first rounder on that defense, but every single position had a guy that didn't need to be protected, that could handle their position at a high level for the collegiate level. And so that's how you get to that level, is just you have to be recruiting everywhere. And now the position they were the best at, though, is also the position that Notre Dame has traditionally struggled at, defensive tackle. The defensive tackles are nasty. Mason Graham's probably a first rounder next season. Chris Jenkins, probably a top 50 pick this season. That's how you control that line of scrimmage. And then they go guys after that, like Kenneth Grant, who you saw make a bunch of plays. Like, having a rotation along that defensive line where every single guy will be drafted is how you look like they did, how you look like Alabama does, how you look like Georgia does year after year. It is rotating those guys in the defensive line and never basically seeing a drop off in play, which is, Notre Dame this year, I love their defensive tackles, but they played a ton of snaps. And when those guys were on the football field, you saw a noticeable drop off in play.
What about the offensive line? Because to your point about depth, I thought it was incredible how once Michigan lost Zach Zinter, who was arguably their best offensive lineman, they didn't skip a beat. Like, obviously that loss mattered, but it certainly didn't show itself against Alabama and against Washington. So for that side, is every single player going to be drafted on the offensive line as well?
I don't think so as much. Like, I don't think they're nearly as talented on the offensive side of the ball, this offensive line. There definitely are, but they don't have like high-end talent guys. I think they're just, the brand of football they play is such that those guys get protected by condensed formations. They run a lot of packed in stuff to where, they're playing in phone booths a lot. And then when they do pass, they're giving their offensive line a lot of help. They're basically aiding it a bunch. They're not running a high end, a drop back heavy passing offense where those guys are getting put on islands. So they're really putting them in a position to succeed. And basically they can just say, go out and be bullies, go out and try to manhandle opposing defensive lines. Some weeks it worked, some weeks it didn't. Like, I don't think this team won because of what they could do offensively. They won because this defense could basically control every game they were in.
Yeah, their defense was incredible, and you make a great point about the depth because I think Notre Dame has a really good defensive line next year, and that's actually what I want to focus on. The starting unit looks great. When we last spoke, we both agreed that Howard Cross and Rylie Mills were probably going to go to the NFL. They elected to stay. Then Notre Dame added Duke transfer R.J. Oben. So with those three guys, plus Jordan Botelho coming back for his fifth season, I think that group has the potential to be a college football playoff caliber defensive line. Is it a national championship level group? I'm not sure yet. But what do you think the ceiling is for Cross and Mills now that they've decided to come back for next season?
Yeah, I couldn't believe that. When the guys are going to be top 100 picks, already spent 4 years in college, that's usually, a green light to go to the NFL. But I think you expect them to come back and be even better next year. That's just kind of how the progression in college works, even if it is fifth year, sixth year, late on in your career. So very impressed with what they got along this defensive line. I think Oben is a high-end athlete as well off the edge. I mean, probably in a similar sort of mold to what Javonte Jean-Baptiste was, in that, maybe he's not a top prospect yet, but the guy has all the tools to become one, has all the tools to be a top end pass rusher. Should he figure it out? Should he, the switch flip proverbially for him? So I really like what they've done there. I obviously did not expect that, but I think it's, with what they have now into the fold, it very much is enough to maintain the defensive dominance we saw this past year.
Do you think Oben would have been drafted if he decided to declare instead of transferring?
I do think so. Guys who are that gifted physically, they get flyers from the NFL because it's especially off the edge. Edge is like the most physically demanding position in the NFL. Guys that, 6'3 plus, 34 plus inch arms, have explosiveness that just, you're going to take a chance on that guy, even if it's 6th, 7th round. So, I think he would have been.
I think part of the reason why I was so surprised that Cross decided to come back is I just didn't see a way that he could really improve his stock. Like, he's got great hands. He's a little bit undersized for a defensive tackle, at least in terms of what defensive tackles typically look like in the NFL. Whereas Rylie Mills, I think there's some areas where he could grow and he could really improve his draft stock from maybe being like a 3rd or 4th round pick to maybe early 2nd round. So for Cross and Mills, what can they improve on? Like, what do you think they need to do to really take that leap in their final season of eligibility?
I'm right there with you on Cross. He was far and away the biggest surprise for me to come back because, like you said, there's no real, the ceiling for a guy with his physical profile is probably where he would have been drafted, like this year, if he had to come out. Now, he could maybe push it a little bit more higher, but just to see a guy with his size going into the 1st round is a rarity. So I still think he's kind of capped in where he could go. Now, Rylie Mills, on the other hand, not as surprising. I think he just needs to play with more consistent pad level because his get off, his play strength can be high level. It's like you see the flashes of really impressive reps from him, but it's just then you see reps where he gets moved off the ball too easily, reps where he's not in control of blocks when he's, a guy who physically should be, controlling lower level guards on a consistent basis. So with him, it's just the consistency aspect. I think it really is all there for him to work his way into a higher draft selection. So he's not nearly as surprising to return as Cross was.
Looking at Notre Dame's secondary, they've got some really talented guys back there with Xavier Watts electing to come back, which wasn't that big of a surprise. I mean, you and I talked about it. We thought that even though he was racking up all these interceptions, he was still pretty green at the safety position, so there's still a lot of room for him to grow. What do you think he needs to do next season to build on what he had last season? I know he might not have the interception number. That would be kind of insane if he's able to do that again. I think teams are probably going to stop trying him so frequently. But with another season under his belt, playing safety, learning the defense, all things like that, where do you think he could ultimately end up being selected?
Yeah, I think just, improving as tackler, improving a play like around the line of scrimmage. A lot of plays on the football and coverage, but safety, especially with kind of a lot of how defenses are playing in the NFL nowadays, it's a tackling position. It's a tackling first position. Can you track down ball carriers in space and can you finish those plays? So I think that's the biggest thing with him. And then I think it shows that. I mean, the coverage ability, is probably the harder one to coach of those. The ability to actually cover guys in space, the ability to make plays on the ball is a little bit more difficult to coach. But so if he improves on that, I could see him being into the day 2 mix, with the big leap next year, but obviously easier said than done in that regard.
We'll be right back with Mike with his thoughts on Rylie Leonard's upside. But first, I want to talk about LinkedIn Jobs. At the start of the new year, every small business owner is asking themselves the same question. What is the one move I can make that'll take my business to the next level in 2024? LinkedIn Jobs knows that your success all depends on the team you surround yourself with. That's why LinkedIn Jobs has created the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. Speaking from my own experience, I know that whenever we're looking to make a new hire, we use LinkedIn because they help find the perfect new team member, and it's so easy because they do the heavy lifting. LinkedIn isn't just another job board either. They have a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. It's so easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs number 1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. We all know hiring can be time-consuming, but adding the right team member can be crucial to achieving your goals in 2024. LinkedIn also knows that small business owners are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. Thankfully, with LinkedIn, the process is intuitive, quick, and easy. Post a job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. What are your expectations for Benjamin Morrison next season? Because I thought it was interesting. He was targeted more than any Notre Dame defensive back, even more so than Cam Hart. And I think there's 2 ways of looking at it. One, they had to throw it at someone, right? Because Notre Dame had 2 really good corners, and I thought Benjamin Morrison had an outstanding year. But so did Cam Hart. And Cam Hart was a veteran. He's leaving. And now next year, Notre Dame is going to replace Cam Hart with either Jaden Mickey, who will be entering his junior season, or Christian Gray. Going from having a guy like Cam Hart to a younger, more inexperienced guy, how do you think that changes things for Benjamin Morrison? Does that change what he has to do next season at all, now that he might have to carry a little bit more of the load?
Yeah, I go back to, Sauce Gardner at Cincinnati, who Mark Stram obviously coached early on in his career, and how they schemed that defense around him. Basically, yes, he locked down his one side of the field, but they let their safeties basically go away from him. They could, the old Revis Island coverage, they basically could put him one-on-one and say, we don't need to have our safety directly in the middle of the field to help over the top of that. We can shade him all the way to the other side and scheme our defense in such a way that we're not worried about what he does. So I think that's the next step in his career. And that's what, like you said, with Cam Hart leaving so you don't have that guy on the other side, you can now start to do that, or want to start to do that, so you can provide help to a more inexperienced corner. And so I think that's the next step. It's not necessarily anything he can do, because his play performance ever since, true freshman year has been outstanding. It's just put more on his plate in what the assignments he's been given is the biggest step that could go a long way for this defense.
Yeah, I could see that, and I have no reason to think that he won't thrive next year, even if he has more responsibility at corner. Now let's flip over to the offensive side. Notre Dame is going to have to retool the offensive line after Joe Alt and Blake Fisher decided to declare early and take their talents to the NFL. Alt's decision certainly makes sense. He's probably going to be a top 10 pick, could potentially be the first offensive lineman taken off the board. Fisher makes a little bit less sense to me. So we don't have to get into the why he made this decision. He seemed pretty dead set on going to the NFL, but where do you think he'll end up being selected?
I'd be hard pressed to see him go higher than, top of the third. One, because it's a very good tackle class. There's a lot of guys. There may be 7 or 8 guys on the offensive tackle position drafted in the first round. So just from a numbers game, he's kind of behind the 8 ball in that regard. And then 2, not to say that I think he would have taken a big step forward next year, but they're not really going to miss him in terms of his on-field performance this past year. He wasn't like dominant at the collegiate level. And for a tackle prospect, that's always concerning. When a guy has all the tools, and that's, what you get drafted on still is physical capability for the most part, but it only gets harder once you get to the league. And so trying to figure out how to be more consistent with your form against better athletes, I just see him having to take almost like a redshirt year once he gets to the NFL. So anytime that's the case, you're not going to be, a top 50 pick. Not many people are drafting top 50 picks saying we need year 3 is the time when you're finally going to start contributing to this roster. So, I was very surprised as well. That was Did not see that coming whatsoever because I thought he could have played his way into a top 15, top 20 selection should he come back and improve. But I think at this point, he's still going to get drafted, probably top 100, but it's probably going to be towards the back end of the top 100.
I'm honestly surprised you said top 100. I think that just has a lot to do with his makeup, like his build and his traits and all the things like that. And, it's one thing for him to declare early, and I think that the notion that players could improve their stock in the bowl game has pretty much gone away. Like if a player wants to leave to go to the NFL, they're going to opt out of the bowl game. And this year, Notre Dame had more bowl opt-outs than ever before. I think part of that had to do with the fact that they didn't get into a tier 1 non-New Year's Six game. They ended up being in the Sun Bowl, but they played against a ranked team, but it didn't seem to matter to a lot of the guys, even some guys who might not even get drafted, like a Thomas Harper. That name surprised me. So around this time of year, there's a lot of conversation. People have a lot of opinions about guys who opt out. Do you think it has a tangible effect on how NFL scouts view these guys who opt out, who aren't necessarily like potential first-round picks, guys who are later rounds? Does it change the evaluation at all?
I think it might for later round guys, because when you're drafted in the later rounds, you're getting drafted for a lot of times your special teams abilities. You're not taking a lot of 6th, 7th round picks, basically have to play special teams to make a roster for certain positions, obviously. So when that's the case, and the guy, scouts behind closed doors will call them, scared to compete or aren't, team players. When you're seeing that a guy opt out who needs all the tape he can get to get a better evaluation, and obviously, if you're going to be playing special teams, you want a guy who wants to be out there every week. So I do think it can impact those guys. I would not recommend anyone who, probably isn't the top 100 pick to be going out or solidify as top 100 pick to be skipping bowl games. But I do think with the way it's going, and again, if you're not playing top competition, you're not realistically helping your drafts again. If you're a top 100 pick, if you're not going to be going up against a guy who's, a legitimate matchup for you, it's probably better for you just to prepare for something like a Senior Bowl or a Shrine Bowl, because those are the areas where I think you can actually raise your draft stock in a meaningful manner, far more so than one bowl game out of 13 games in the season.
Why do you think that is? Is it just because there's a lot more scouts around the Senior Bowl and the preparation, all that? Because Sam Hartman, for example, did not play in the bowl game, even though there was certainly a point where everyone thought he was going to play in the bowl game. I think Sam Hartman even thought that he was going to play in the bowl game. He decided not to, but he's going to participate in the Senior Bowl. Is it just because the scouts and the competition that they'll be going up against?
It's competition level, yeah. You're seeing a guy it's competition level and almost scheme agnostic. It's just a scheme that is not what you are used to. So basically throwing a guy into a new situation, all things being equal for all the guys there, how do they compete and how do they stack up against peers? Because, if you look really good there, chances are against guys who will also be in the NFL next year, chances are you'll probably be, looking really good once you get to the NFL, or at least like looking better than those guys once you get to the NFL. It's kind of like an equalizer. So, yeah, I believe in the power of those games. I think those games are big for any evaluations I do. Whereas one bowl game is just one of 13. And especially if it may not be coming against the best competition, you might be saying the risk of injury is not worth what, the preparation that I could have at this point is.
Yeah, I'm kind of torn on it sometimes. Like, there's certainly some players who I think should opt out. Someone like a Marvin Harrison Jr., who's no doubt top 3 pick. Like, I'd understand why that player wants to leave. And if we think about it, like Jalen Smith and the injury that he suffered back in the Fiesta Bowl sort of changed the course of college football bowl games for the foreseeable future. And then there's some guys who I'm like, why aren't you playing? It's almost like the NBA Combine. I made this comparison before where it's like, if you're going to be drafted, even outside of the lottery, if you're going to be drafted in the first round, you don't go to the NBA Combine because a decade ago, or maybe even a little bit longer than that, players decided it's just not cool to go, and therefore guys don't go. I don't really understand it, but it's just the way it is these days, and I don't think it's going to be changing anytime soon with the expanded playoff. Mike and I still have more to get to, including the prospects who he believes will improve their stock the most over the course of these next few months. But first, I wanted to tell you about FanDuel. The NFL regular season is wrapping up, but there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is so easy to use, and there are so many different ways to bet, including live same-game parlays. You can find bets in the new Explore tab, and you can make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, which is the best way to find popular parlays and more. I'm sticking with my pick that I gave out in yesterday's episode. Give me the Browns to cover -2.5 on the road against the Houston Texans in the wildcard game. Yes, I'm a Browns fan. Yes, this is biased, but you know what? I'm riding with Joe Flacco and the Browns. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. Let's talk about the quarterback. Going into the 2023 season, Rylie Leonard was looked at a guy who could potentially be a top quarterback in this upcoming draft class if we were able to build on the success that he had in 2022. Obviously, things didn't go as planned. He gets hurt in the game against Notre Dame that effectively wiped out the rest of his season. But now he's the quarterback at Notre Dame. So big picture, just what do you think of his game?
So I wasn't as high on him as others headed into this year. I didn't have him, so I did like my top prospects, quarterback position. I think I had him QB8 in the class, which, obviously that's still good. Yeah. For if that's your college quarterback, you're happy with that. But I do think he doesn't have the strongest arm. I do worry about his ability to push the ball downfield consistently, and especially when you get to the NFL. In college, you don't necessarily need the strongest arm to be a downfield passer. Obviously, saw the Hartman over the course of his career, but even at Duke, he didn't do it. And now the talent level between Duke's wide receivers and Notre Dame's wide receivers, I think, will be pretty drastic. And you'll see his game. Yeah, again, hopefully. And you'll see his game unlocked to a degree. But that's not necessarily where he wins. Where he wins is consistent decision-making, accuracy underneath, and the fact that guy's one heck of an athlete. I mean, he is, if they are not retooling this running game to feature him in a big way, maybe not every week, maybe not when you play the navies of the world, but when you play high-end competition, if he's not feared in the running game, I think something's wrong with this offense. Obviously, seeing how LSU used Jaden Daniels last year, I'm not too worried about that being the case. So that's what he brings to the table, though, is that dynamism that just defenses have to account for that Notre Dame just truthfully hasn't had in a while. So I think that's his biggest calling card, is that probably not going to make mistakes to the football, going to be dynamic on the ground. And with how Notre Dame's built, you can't find really a better combination in my eyes of what they want to do offensively, a quarterback for that, unless you're going to have an all-world, top first-round type of prospect. If the guy's going to be more of a mid to late rounder, this is the mold of guy you want, in my opinion.
Yeah, I've never really understood the NFL potential for him. I think he could be a really good college player. He's so big, he's so athletic, and I think he has a good enough arm. But especially when it comes to what he could be in the NFL, I think accuracy is a real concern with him. So how do you feel about a quarterback in the modern game and their ability to improve accuracy? Because there's one school of thought where it's kind of natural. You're either accurate or you're not. And then there's the other school where that can actually be taught and that could be improved upon with the right teaching. What do you think? So for a guy like Leonard, do you think he could really improve his accuracy that much in just one season at Notre Dame?
I think so. Now, maybe not one season in Notre Dame, but I do think that he's a guy who quarterbacks in the whole, there is known basically mechanics that will improve your accuracy, that basically it's been figured out. It's been solved. We know how throwing mechanics work now, and that there's one way to throw that should you do that it will more than likely or not improve your accuracy. And so it's a kind of mechanical thing that if a guy does it enough, it's almost like a golf swing. A guy does it enough, you can get better at it. So I think it's not easy. And some guys have good mechanics and are still inconsistent. And those guys, that's just part of who they are. No one's just going to work on their accuracy so much that they become Joe Burrow overnight, right? That just doesn't happen. So, but I do think there is it's something that can be improved more nowadays than ever before because we know basically how to do it.
Yeah, it's interesting because when Sam Hartman came over to Notre Dame, it was mostly because he wanted to play another year of college football, make some NIL money, but also to play in a more pro-style system and improve his draft stock. That really didn't go as planned. I don't really think that's why Rylie Leonard went to Notre Dame. I don't think that the NFL was really the main factor in his decision. I also think that with Mike Denbrock, Notre Dame is probably they'll probably have some pro-style formation, some sets, and some principles overall, like running the ball, but he's not really a pro-style quarterback, and I think Notre Dame is going to cater their offense to him and what he does best. So assuming Notre Dame builds around Leonard, what do you think is the best case scenario with him in his one season at Notre Dame?
wins the Heisman, Notre Dame wins the national championship. That's the best case scenario. I think
if you think that's realistic, then I'm all in. I didn't know you were going to take it that far.
No. I do think there's a world in which, like, he's takes a massive leap in efficiency, because it's not like he's going from, Sam Hartman, Wake Forest, even though Wake Forest isn't anything special as a program, they still have talent throughout that offense that is closer to an NFL level than Duke has. Duke really is just struggling to find offensive linemen and receiver talent. Like, they just don't have guys there. And so when he faced teams like Clemson, when he faced teams that really had NFL dudes at every level, there was nothing there for him. And so I think that's the biggest thing, is that just, you don't know what could be unlocked for him. It's almost like Daniel Jones going from Duke to the NFL. Like, he could legitimately be a completely different guy, because he was raising the bar already at Duke to something that, we hadn't seen since Daniel Jones offensively at Duke. So I do think that there's a lot of reason to be optimistic about his projection, even if last year didn't go kind of as planned for him.
Yeah, and I think the expectations for him, at least among the fan base and the team, are going to be a lot different for Leonard compared to Hartman, where it's like Hartman was the savior, the prince that was promised, the guy who's going to come in and change everything, where it's like it's a little bit more tempered with Leonard, and I think that's part of because of the Hartman experience. But let's talk about a few prospects in this year's draft class. Which Notre Dame player do you think will improve his draft stock the most as they go through the Combine, Pro Day, and the rest of the evaluation process?
That's a great question. Honestly, it's probably Cam Hart. I do think not only was his tape good this year, but then he's a guy who I think will test really well. I think at the Senior Bowl, I'd fully expect him to be the type of corner who excels there. The drills you do that really get the scouts' eyes are press man on the outside, press man one-on-ones, and the wide receivers. And I think that's where he excels. Like, that's his game. He's not, he can play off coverage, but he's not necessarily your smooth off coverage mover. He's a guy who can beat you up at the line of scrimmage for sure. So I do think he is one that I think you'll start to see rise over the course of the pre-draft process.
Well, that's encouraging. I really hope it works out for Cam Hart because, he had 3 shoulder surgeries. Those have a tendency to sort of come back and bite you later on. But then again, he played this past season fully healthy throughout the entire year. I think that was the first time that's happened for him since he made that move over to cornerback. Okay, after Joe Alt, who do you think is going to be the next Notre Dame player taken off the board?
That's a great question. I think it could either be – I think it's either going to be Hart or Estimate, right? I think it's one of those two, I would guess. Even Fisher could be there too.
What about
that one's tough.
I honestly thought you might say Javonte Jean-Baptiste.
No, I don't think he's quite to that. I bet he goes day 3 at this point.
Okay, what? Well,
let me say Fisher. I'll say Fisher's the next one. Wow.
Why do you think JJB? Like, what's holding him back?
Production. You're 5th-year guy and highly tooled, but at that year of your career, you would expect just a higher level of play on a consistent basis. So I think that's the biggest thing. Now, obviously, he has sort of the pre-draft process to prove that wrong, but that's the biggest thing with him.
Yeah, I see your point. I guess I figured he had done enough this past season at Notre Dame. He was such a big part of that defense, and he had made some serious strides in the run game, stopping the run. It wasn't something that he was asked to do a lot when he was at Ohio State, but this year he was a force for Notre Dame. So I could see him as a guy who also goes up draft boards because he's physically, he's got all the tools and all that. But I was a little bit surprised to see Estime as high as you said, because I feel like, the way running backs are viewed in the NFL now, and he's not like going to burn anyone in the 40 or anything like that. Do you think that he could be a productive NFL running back for the next few years?
I think so. He's kind of like a poor man's Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor ran 4.39. I don't think Estimate's going to run that, but I could see him running faster than a lot of the other big backs in this class, whether it's Braylon Allen or guys of that mold. He's a power back, but then also I'd say probably runs in the 4.5s, which for a power back is more than good enough. So given his production, given that, end of the 3rd, 4th round is probably where I see him coming off the board, which again, after Joe Alt, there's really no guy I have a great handle on whether they're going to be a top 100 player or not, just because of, so many different other factors.
Well, on the topic of running backs, would you ever have guessed that Kiron Williams would be as good in the NFL as he is right now for the Rams?
I would not have. Now, he went to a great spot for him.
Yeah, he did.
And he's always been super talented. It's just, I worried about the fact that the guy was undersized and the guy was not particularly fast. And so always, from an on-field performance perspective, it never mattered, right? At Notre Dame, he had that 90-yarder his junior year. It wasn't like his breakaway speed was that big of a deal. And especially running back in the NFL, the amount of times you use your breakaway speed is so limited compared to how much it matters in college, that I'm not surprised that he's doing this, but would I have predicted it? No way.
Yeah, I thought he'd be good. I definitely thought he was a little underrated coming out of college because he was basically the entire offense in 2021, and that was not a good offensive line. So really happy for him. Really excited to see the success he's had in the NFL. Is there a more unlikely Notre Dame player who's actually thrived in the NFL on the same team in Ben Skoranek?
No, no way, no chance. And I in college I was like, we should do better than Ben Skoranek. And now in the NFL, he's starting in the NFL. So no, that for sure. No.
I know if a Notre Dame player gets taken by the Rams, I'm like, oh my God, whatever I thought about that player's potential was clearly wrong, because the fact that Ben Skoranek I think he's a captain now. It's wild.
Amazing.
It's wild. But be sure to follow Mike's draft coverage for The Messenger, and you can listen to him on Renner Ranks, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Mike, thanks so much for the time. I have a lot more questions to ask you. We're going to have to save it for another time, and I'm sure we'll talk again before the NFL draft. Thanks for doing this, man.
For sure, Tyler.
That is going to do it for this episode. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first listen of the day. You're not going to want to miss tomorrow's episode. We're going to have men's basketball beat writer Tom Noy from the South Bend Tribune back on the show to do a deep dive into Micah Shrewsbury's squad and the ups and downs they've experienced so far this season. Stay tuned for that. Remember, subscribe to the show on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, and you can follow the show wherever you do your social media. The X account is at Locked On Irish. Instagram is at Locked On Irish Pod, and my personal X account is at Tyler, WOJCIAK. Same time, same place tomorrow, guys. See you then.